Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sonic video. This is going to be my review for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So the movie's been out a few days now. I went to see it yesterday. I was going to do a video, but I kind of realized I probably needed to actually take a few more notes before I did my review, because unlike the first two movies, which were relatively straightforward to the point, there's a little bit more going on in this one that makes it, in my mind, overall a better movie than the previous two, both from a Sonic perspective, but just I think in general. So I needed to get some kind of thoughts into order here before I did it. So most of this is going to be a spoiler review. I'm just going to start off with a couple minutes of just general thoughts for anyone who maybe wants the more non-spoiler thoughts on this. But as usual, I think it is more interesting to talk about these movies full spoilers, where we can get into all of the details. But yeah, overall, Sonic 3, like I said, it's my favorite of the three by a pretty large margin. The main reason for that is just that the first movie, while solid, is very simple and doesn't actually have that much sort of Sonic lore stuff necessarily going on. It's mostly just the introduction of Sonic and kind of the Eggman kind of origin to a certain degree, but it's mostly a kind of human-based movie to a certain degree. The second movie is better, again, in that it introduces more of the characters, but still has a relatively simple plot. And while it's more Sonic focused, it's still maybe not quite where they need it to be. This one is kind of out and out Sonic focused. The introduction of Shadow in this movie, the plot obviously involving humans, but like Robotnik kind of focused stuff, and the link into all that stuff into the past. It's getting into kind of more of the kind of lore stuff that we're kind of looking for here. It's a Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation, which is quite heavily altered, but is still touching on the same ideas. But obviously the idea in the movie kind of universe here, they have decided to bring this plot point up ahead of the introduction of like a lot of the other cast members of the kind of Sonic overall cast. But in my mind, it works. This is a great way with the Shadow plot to, I think, immediately get it through to people at a very early point that, hey, the Sonic universe has some very interesting stuff going on when we focus specifically on the Sonic stuff, and it opens the door to, as we go forward. I think Sonic 4 just recently was like, hey, it's basically happening in a few years, and I'm assuming it will just continue to go on and build up to likely its own sort of Sonic style Avengers movie when they start to have more of the characters involved and they can do even bigger things overall. And I think this was the thing that really showed that we don't have to keep the movies so simple, kind of like the first one was. We can really start to make these kind of action adventure kind of epics to a certain degree. This one kind of showed the way. Shadow is of course fantastic in this, such a fan-loved character, and you know they got everything right here. The kind of attitude, the approach, the voice actor Keanu Reeves, the animation of him, the action fighting with him is all really, really well done. And they actually have, you know, a character arc with him. Of course, Gerald Robotnik is involved here as well, as we kind of have double, kind of triple villains going on in this movie. But it works well. There's a backstory here to explain motivations for these characters. There's things to talk about that, which we will get into. But overall, start to finish, this was a very fun and enjoyable movie that had some properly big emotional moments, whereas I'd say Sonic 1 and 2 mostly focused on doing some very kind of solid fundamental character arcs surrounding kind of like family and friends. This one got into a little bit more kind of interesting stuff because it had that kind of history lesson aspect to it, but still fundamentally kind of coming back to sort of like family and friends as being the kind of core emotional arcs. But it works because there's this other epic stuff happening alongside it, of course. So I think a lot of the characters, we're getting to having a relatively big cast now with like full Team Sonic here. Now Shadow's involved, and we're still using some of the human characters, but nowhere near as much as the first movie, and even compared to the second movie, which didn't use them as much, even less again. So you could tell they're feeling more confident that they can really move towards the Sonic stuff being the focus. Just with the setup that they have here, I don't think they're ever fully going to move away from that, because I think especially Tom and Maddie are quite important to Sonic being his kind of parents now going forward. But I think as we go forward, we will have to take kind of the steps away, kind of realizing that the action is going to have to be done by the kind of Sonic characters, and it can't really be done by our human characters. But there's always that kind of emotional through line back to Tom and Maddie, which I think is the correct way to do it. And so they were used in the right amount this time. And to a certain degree, the plot that they do here kind of makes it feel like going forward, they probably shouldn't really be used on the missions necessarily going forward. So I'm overall pretty positive on this. Obviously, I wouldn't go crazy with the, like, it's one of the best movies of all time type situation, but it's super, super fun. There's obviously room for improvement, of course, which I think mainly comes down to what was kind of the thing with the first two movies as well. Trying to get that balance of tone right between Sonic being the kind of fun, kind of referential character talking about all this stuff, kind of making jokes all the time, the goofiness of kind of this, specifically this version of Robotnik and stuff like that, versus the fact that they do have to have a certain serious plot at a certain point. This one I think is better, but at the same time arguably has some of the maybe worst cases of them just tonally getting things wrong at maybe the wrong moment. But it's not too bad overall because it kind of works. I'll get into it when I talk about spoilers overall, but it's just one of those things where, yeah, apart from some of that kind of balance of humor, and then I would say just the general kind of kids movie that's trying to do a little bit more than just standard movie for kids thing of, does it have enough time to execute on all the plots and characters that it has going on? Not quite. Like, it could be better. I feel very similarly about this movie to the way I feel about Transformers 1, which also is from Paramount, in that they're franchise movies that really showcase each of their franchises properly. Like, Transformers 1 feels like the first Transformers movie that properly, you know, really full on just utilizes Transformers as the characters, and this felt like the same for Sonic. And they both, I would say, have that kind of similar dynamic of ultimately it just that balance of humor versus kind of seriousness, and is there enough time for everything are my main issues with them. And it just seems to be a probably more industry-wide thing about kind of how you kind of tackle that overall going forward. But that out of the way, let's get into the spoilers here. So I have a rough structure to talking about this here. I'm going to actually start with the backstory, which basically will bring us into the kind of Robotnik family stuff. So we'll talk about both Eggmen at this point. Then I think I'm going to go into Team Sonic, which will eventually bring us into the Sonic and Shadow dynamic, and basically into the end of the movie and the after credits scene. That's roughly how I'm going to go about doing this. So yeah, a big part of this, of course, because Shadow's been in stasis effectively for 50 years, is the backstory, because this is basically what sets into play when the characters are freed here, the plot of this movie, and that is Shadow and Gerald, and basically what happened to Maria in the past, like 50 years ago. So, we basically get the idea that Shadow's origin as presented in this movie is that, yes, they still go with the idea he's like the ultimate life form. He crashes in like a meteorite down on the planet, and he's found by kind of Gun in the past, and he is just, you know, this hedgehog in this kind of crater. They don't really go into it more than that, other than the idea of, I guess this sort of explains his sort of innate chaos powers and what exactly is going on there. And so they begin to kind of test on him, and they find out that the chaos energy is this incredible source of energy, but it is dangerous because they can barely contain it. And so Shadow is mostly treated as just a dangerous being from this point on, and so he has no connection with anyone and is mostly just experimented on. And so there's a big sense of everyone is afraid of him, and because of that he is sort of fearful and cautious around everyone else, until Maria and I guess Gerald come into play here. Maria is the first one to kind of get through this idea of, she's initially a bit afraid of him, but then he's giving his usual kind of trademark sort of scowl, showing how kind of angsty he is to a certain degree, but she just kind of laughs at it and then draws kind of graffiti basically on his tube here, and this kind of breaks the ice between the two. And they basically just do a montage through the idea of slowly but surely these two become very close friends. Maria is the one and main connection that Shadow has to someone who kind of really cares for him, and they have a lot of fun together at the base. Her being there, I suppose, makes the kind of experiments and what they're doing there a little bit easier for him to handle. But basically, because of stuff that Gerald is doing, this causes them to effectively have to kind of run away, more or less. And so this is the kind of big incident that they gradually reveal over the course of the movie. What happens to Maria? Unlike the games, where I believe she's just straight up shot, here we get this incident where the three of them are running away, and there's soldiers there. And the commander guy, who in the present day is obviously quite old, we see him in the past. He tries to kind of get the soldiers to put their guns down, but kind of inadvertently makes one of the soldiers fire. No one gets hit by it, but it hits one of the kind of tanks that has the sort of like shadow energy goo in it or whatever. That's what explodes, and that's what kills Maria and nearly kills Shadow and Gerald. But this is, of course, the incident that they mainly play it up in the movie as like this is Shadow's backstory, even though it is the backstory for both Gerald and Sonic and Shadow. No, we'll get into the idea of, you know, they never really show Gerald interacting with Maria, and I think that is a little bit of a problem in the movie. That I get why you maybe wanted to keep this separate to a certain degree, because with your two villains, Shadow and Maria, you want one of them to be sort of sympathetic, that there's hope, and then the other one, you're not meant to really see the hope. But I think there was a way to do this where you didn't just have to almost like ignore the Gerald-Maria connection outside of pretty much literally this one scene of him seriously looking at Shadow over Maria's body, which is just meant to be the connection of this is why when Gerald shows up, Shadow's kind of on board with him, because he was the other person that he kind of trusted, because he was family to Maria. So this is the thing here. This is why they both want revenge. Shadow just kind of wants to rage against the world after this point because he has lost Maria, and Gerald wants to do the same. And so we get the setup in the present day here that it is Gerald running the show, who later brings Ivo, like our actual Eggman, into play as well. Shadow then in the kind of more middle of the movie, I guess, more is a kind of lackey to a certain degree, though he does act on his own and is so competent, it kind of works. But the focus on some of this stuff maybe is a little bit inconsistent perhaps throughout the movie in terms of hitting the character arcs as much as they probably need to. Like, the montage is really good because you get so many nice setup moments. Like, I think one of the first ones right early on in the movie is Maria on the guitar plays Live and Learn, kind of establishing that that piece of music is like Shadow's theme. There's a connection to Maria as well as it being just a really great sort of Sonic song, of course, from Sonic Adventure 2. But then you get the big setup line of the idea that a light from a star can still sort of shine even though it's gone, just because of how much distance there is, how long it takes that light to get there. And that Maria made this point in the past, and this is the line that will ultimately sort of turn Shadow back around once he sort of remembers this as well. The stuff like that. Also, I suppose the idea they ultimately go with to explain Shadow's special kind of hover shoes is that, well, Maria comes into the base on roller skates, and they kind of, a lot of the fun they have is roller skating around the base. So that's why he has the kind of rocket shoes as a way to kind of utilize his powers. They never directly make that connection, but it's like, it feels very obvious, and like there's no reason for Maria to be wearing roller skates unless it's meant to be the sort of setup that he wears that type of shoe to kind of mimic this thing that Maria did a lot. So, That was fun. The Maria that we get here, I haven't played, I think, the most recent game that I think has a little bit more Maria in it from the more canon stuff. But my memories of Sonic Adventure 2 is that Maria isn't that much of a character outside of just being a good influence overall. And so they play at the very basic sort of character arc of just the bad Hedgehog and the good Maria in the past, whereas she's a more fleshed out kind of character here overall. But like I said, I think there is a little bit that's perhaps missing here when it comes to some of the Robotnik family stuff that they it's not that they just are like, hey, these are just the characters, don't think about the family history too much. They, in dialogue, address some of this to a certain degree about like, hey, like, who did what with who. Like Ivo doesn't know any of this like at all, but Gerald clearly knows quite a bit of this, which is why he's effectively Maria's guardian. But what's going on here? And I think it was a bit of a mistake to not have any Gerald interaction really with Maria to get across, in a way, what his connection to her was, and maybe to contrast the idea that in the end, Shadow is able to turn around because he can still see what Maria would want to a certain degree, whereas Gerald can't. But because we never really saw how much of an influence there was with Maria, it was kind of weird. But then you get that big line from later on in the movie where Gerald says to Ivo that, like, you're no Maria, as in, I effectively don't have any family. I've been using you this entire time because you're also a good sort of robot expert, basically. But I don't value you enough that I'm happy to die here. I'm happy to basically take everyone out, including you, because I don't overly value you as family because you were no Maria. And it's like, wait. That needs to be explained. It's a very cutting line that, like, is very, very serious in a dynamic that is otherwise quite goofy across the entire movie. But I feel it needed a bit more explanation because Gerald and Maria didn't really interact. Maria, while a fun character who you understand, like, why she would have the connection to Shadow, there's a sense of, like, is there some sort of, like, is she also really good at science and was actually, like, this ultimate potential next level genius that, like, we don't know about here? Because it felt like she was mainly there just because she always follows her grandfather around and, like, she's not actually a part of this. So, like, what was so important in a way to Gerald with Maria other than, like, I guess just the family connection? But then, like, I get it's sort of what they're trying to go for here. Even though he sort of finds a member of his family again, he can't bring himself to care because he lost the family member he had the strong connection to. I needed a little bit more. I think that's my ultimate thoughts of, like, this to be at the next level. I like what was here, and I don't think that the story is lacking because of it, but you can definitely tell there's some kind of weirdness and confusion surrounding some of this stuff, and I wonder how much was planned. What is their cutting room floor content that was some of this stuff delved into a little bit more? Because yeah, the other part of this is, of course, like, why was he never in Ivo's life? Well, I guess the logic from that is just that he didn't think much of Ivo at a certain point, and that's why he says what he says. But then, if he values their sort of, like, skills so much, why did he focus on Maria? And then, I don't blame anyone for maybe kind of assuming that because of the family connections at play here that, or are they trying to say Ivo and Maria are like brother and sister? But my understanding from the canon, and I remember this from Sonic Frontiers, because I think this is the first time I remember this connection being said, that, like, oh, Maria and Ivo, Eggman, are cousins. So the family dynamic is that, I guess, you know, Gerald has two children, and then each of them have, you know, one or the other, and that's the dynamic. So what happened there in the kind of missing line of the Robotniks, there's some weirdness going on here. They seem to explain his advanced age with the idea that, I guess, he uses Shadow's quills or something like that to empower him, that humans can use the energy of the sort of, like, the empowered beings, so, like, Sonic's energy, I guess Knuckles' energy, as well as Shadow's energy, to it obviously does the weird thing where like it zaps them and it kind of gives them like an energy kind of boost or whatever, but it also potentially seems to lengthen their lives to a certain degree, which I'm guessing is just the explanation behind that. So yeah, that is the core backstory here, because I would say it is a little bit of a shocking twist when Gerald reveals his plan, like, oh, it's the Eclipse Cannon, and I think he initially alludes to the idea, we're going to use the Eclipse Cannon to like maybe destroy Gun headquarters, and it's like, okay, that makes sense, that will give us the opportunity to control the world at that point. But no, he wants to like empower the cannon fully, like overpower it with Shadow's power and destroy the entire planet. And he is fine with going out with that because he is just done with the entire world because of what happened. And this is where the disagreement comes in between Gerald and Ivo, which, getting into that sort of across the movie, I've been relatively fine in the first two movies with how over the top kind of weird and goofy Eggman is, though there definitely has been a sense that kind of they have Jim Carrey on board. They're just gonna, you know, be a little bit indulgent there and just kind of give him the scenes he wants. We're gonna utilize him and give him these really long sequences where he just gets to be weird. And it's been like, okay, the plot's fairly kind of basic to the point. I don't mind that too much in the first two movies. Here, where there is more complex storytelling going on, I think you feel the time that gets quote-unquote wasted on some of this stuff a little bit more, because while they're doing the laser room dance sequence together, I'm kind of like, no, can we actually address some of the family drama stuff here? Can we talk about Maria here? Can we go back into the thing you kind of brushed past by being weird, which is, why weren't you ever in his life, especially in the early days? And you know, I would have liked to have maybe seen like Ivo kind of in a way like allude to Maria to a certain degree and like just what was going on there. It just felt like there was an aspect to the family backstory that they just did not want to touch, which was a little bit kind of weird to me. And I think this might have been just better done if this was treated a little bit more just seriously, that like they've actually found kind of like a family together. Of course, they're both Robotniks, they are both weird, you can play on that. I just think at times they overdid it. And I think the biggest example of that, where the writers, for whatever reason, just couldn't get out of their own way, was, I'll get to properly talking about it later, but we have our big Supersonic, Super Shadow team up, and Live and Learn hits. It's the most epic part of the movie to a certain degree. And of course, we cut away to what's going on elsewhere, and we cut to the fight between Gerald and Ivo. Live and Learn is just kind of finished because we're cutting to a different scene. And here's Ivo with like praying mantis kind of hands, and Gerald is jumping around like a scorpion, and it's just this is the tonal shift that just didn't work for me. That there are movies that can do this well, where you're in the finale and you have very different things going on, but you care about each of them. Like, I would say actually like a lot of the Star Wars movies do a relatively good job at this, like say episode 1, 3, of just there's big things going on while the big action sequence is happening. But this was just like, no. You cut from this absolute epicness to praying mantis versus scorpion and these two kind of old guys fighting each other. And it's meant to be impactful because it's meant to be two family members fighting based on their different sort of like ideals, that like one is just out to destroy everything because he's so enraged over what happened to a family member and can't seem to feel any sense of care towards the family member standing in front of him. And then Ivo, of course, there's a sense of like he wants to save the planet, but also I need to save the planet because I want to be the one to kind of rule over it, that this is going too far. And it just gets a little bit undercut because for whatever reason, I think they go so over the top with some of this stuff. They forget to add the emotion back in, which should be there because it is two family members kind of fighting, and it's quite important with what they ultimately do. And especially because once Gerald has got out of the way, and he is killed in a somewhat comedic way, I don't mind it too much because it was probably the correct way to do it. But after that, it's like, oh, the goofiness is kind of gone because the two Jim Carrey characters are not like amplifying the kind of comedy levels to an extreme. And then you get to be just a bit more serious because Ivo doesn't want the world to end either, so he's on board with what the heroes are doing, and he gets his big sacrifice moment where his kind of character arc kind of comes full circle here, which with him, and this is maybe where the movie kind of, are they trying to keep it simple here, that in their mind, the writers' minds, Ivo Eggman's arc was about ultimately him and Stone, like what they do at the end here. And the Gerald stuff doesn't really matter too much because the Gerald stuff was about Gerald. But I think they could have done both, because the whole point is it's this jealousy arc of the second he sees that his grandfather's back, he sort of pushes Stone to the side of like, I don't need you anymore because I have my genius grandfather here. And Stone gets pushed aside, and you see that Stone is a little lost kind of coming out of this. But in the end, he realizes his actual kind of biological family member didn't care about him, but that he always had someone who was loyal to him, who cared about him, that he actually in the end does care about in Agent Stone. And so his big sacrifice moment actually hits in that, like, it's still Eggman kind of being goofy to a certain degree, but it's him, you know, on the controls, trying to contain the energy of this thing so it doesn't blow at the wrong time. And he gives his kind of live stream pretty much out to everyone, but it's focused on Stone and like the apology and the idea of, you know, he was actually a, you know, what's the wording he uses? Like he's not a sycophant, he's a sycophant, which was kind of nice. And we get a lot of the references to some of the in jokes that those two had with each other. Like, what is it? Was it goat milk coffee or whatever, that stuff gets referenced, and when it works, it's actually quite an emotional moment, even though this also has been a quite weird and goofy dynamic in the previous movies. But it kind of hits because it's the villain making this big sacrifice, helping to save the world. And is it the end of the character? It's hard to say, just because you would say maybe because of Jim Carrey. Is he going to come back? Especially because I'm guessing they won't bring him back for the next movie. They're going to want a gap. But by the time they do, potentially movie 5, you know, is he going to be in a position to like want to come back? And, you know, might they need to transition kind of and do things a little bit differently with things? I'm not sure, because it does feel like you always need your Sonic stuff to have an Eggman. And is there some way where they can kind of maybe make Stone the new kind of younger Eggman or something like that? That could be an interesting way to do it, depending on what their approach is. Who knows? Maybe Jim Carrey's just completely on board and they'll come back for as many movies as they want. We just don't know what the full situation is here. But yeah, the stuff here with the Eclipse Cannon I thought was pretty good. They obviously didn't do the full Bio-Lizard plot from the original because I don't think they wanted to maybe overcomplicate Shadow's backstory, at least at this point in time, by going too much into his origins. It's more like, he's here. There is some mystery surrounding his origins, because with a lot of the other characters, their origins are that just they're from other planets. And so Knuckles is from the Echidna tribe, where there's a planet that has echidnas on it, you know. And there's all these other animal groups, like there's owls, there's obviously hedgehogs, of course, and we'll get to talking about Amy kind of later on. But then there's this idea that Shadow is a hedgehog, but he's also different in that he seems to be connected to some other kind of cosmic type thing going on. What's that about? But yeah, there was no time to do the Bio-Lizard, so instead the Supersonic stuff actually is Sonic versus Shadow, which I think works. Them teaming up to take out all the robots and having to deal with the cannon itself firing, plus, you know, dealing with a thing kind of falling out of orbit and its power source being kind of basically like a nuclear bomb of sorts as well. So that all, I think, is pretty nice in this kind of part of it. Getting into, I suppose, Team Sonic. I know it's been quite a while into this, talking about this, but it is the ultimate idea of like what makes the plot of this movie is the villains and what they're about and the dynamics that are kind of created around them. The core Team Sonic plot, because Sonic gets a kind of like an individual arc with Shadow as well, it's mostly about kind of teamwork, and that Sonic as the team leader needs to work to be a better leader, that he's kind of so used to doing things solo that, hey, you know, come up with a plan, like utilize Knuckles a bit more, utilize Tails a bit more, because they can support you, you can support them, depending on what actually is happening here, and that's kind of that general idea. Tails specifically, they mostly go for the idea that Tails is the kind of positive friend of Sonic. The main thing in the movie that they do here is they use the Tails-Sonic dynamic to compare with the Stone-Ivo dynamic to Stone. For Stone to realize that, wait, like, I'm his assistant, but, like, actually, it should be more like friends. And he gets a bit jealous of the fact that, you know, oh, the Team Sonic members are just friends. It's not an assistant dynamic, and kind of Stone needs to kind of realize that. And again, it's the found family dynamic versus the biological family dynamic, and coming into play as well. So that was nice. Tails gets a few kind of nice moments. The big one being like, he organizes the thing with Knuckles of like, I'll go save Sonic as he's falling out of the atmosphere. Knuckles needs to kind of come in at the end, but it's a big kind of brave moment from Tails. And you know, there's some other stuff as well, like Tails works with Robotnik to kind of maneuver the cannon out of the way as well, because they're the two kind of tech characters, obviously. You know, nice enough, but you can maybe tell there wasn't a super set in stone, like maybe arc for Tails as such, but Tails was not ignored in this movie. Tails didn't just fade into the background. Tails got moments, I think, is the big point here. So it's the correct usage, given that the plot was not about Tails. Knuckles has a little bit more going on here. It's still a sort of similar dynamic, but I think they utilize Knuckles quite well here. And because Knuckles is the one who can sort of more challenge Sonic on an even level. He is friends with Sonic, but it's a different kind of friendship. It's a rival friendship with Sonic, because he wants it to be Team Knuckles, and that's more of a joke than anything, because with the key scene between the two, we see that he ultimately is going to be someone who supports Team Sonic. And you get across that idea because he is this honorable echidna warrior. He's very focused on his promises, and so he calls out Sonic for wanting the Master Emerald for revenge. I have promised to protect that against everything, so I have to stand up to you here to protect that. But I've also made another promise, and that is to kind of be a part of this team, to support this team, to support you. And I forget the exact wording that he used, because again, I've only seen the movie once, but it's something along the lines of like, I choose to focus on that second promise over the first one, given that there's now a conflict between the two of them. And this is meant to be this big sort of show of trust. Knuckles will ultimately trust Sonic to do the right thing by telling him where the Master Emerald is, over going against him at this moment, because he trusts him. Which I think is a really, really good character moment for Knuckles as the sort of like, you know, assistant captain of the team to a certain degree. And then initially I was worried, like, oh, is Knuckles just going to get beaten up the whole time? He's just going to be the one to take a lot of damage throughout the movie. And he takes some beatings early on in maybe the first half, but I think the writers do a good job of kind of redeeming him in the second half, where he gets to be the sort of break glass in case of emergency character at the gun headquarters, where he comes in and is quite strong. He knocks down the entrance into the old gun headquarters as well. And then, of course, yeah, his big moment, he's the one who helps to save Sonic and Tails right at the end. So very much just that kind of like big brother style character, just always supporting in the background, but, you know, also can challenge Sonic when required, which is nice. And then you still get little bits of the humor because he is overly literal and stuff like that, but they didn't overdo it with him. So, again, given that the movie was not about Knuckles, I was very happy with actually what we got with Knuckles. It was a good usage of like a secondary character ultimately for the movie. So that was good. The only reference to the Knuckles show, as far as I'm aware, is just the idea that like Knuckles and Wade relationship, and that Knuckles views Wade as a powerful warrior. But it did not come across to me at all like you needed to watch that show. I didn't watch it. I watched enough videos about that show to, I think, know that I don't need to watch the whole thing. So that's definitely something that needs to improve. If this universe is going to have extra content, you need your spin-off shows to be better than what the Knuckles show was. And that's my thoughts without having actually seen it. It's just that it's not giving me any indication for what I've seen to actually want to go and see it. If literally the only thing I'm getting out of it with the main movies is slight context for Wade, who has like 10 seconds of screen time. No. It was fun to see him playing hockey with the Master Emerald and just Sonic immediately taking it, but you know, that was fine. And so yeah, then we need to get into the sort of Sonic and Shadow dynamic, and mostly here because I've addressed the setup for Shadow. This is the sort of Sonic side of things, which is obviously they immediately compare and contrast, and I think this was in the trailer. It's the idea that both of you have these tragic backstories. You've both lost a very important person to you in the past. Sonic lost Longclaw, and Shadow lost Maria. The difference is what kind of happened after that is that Sonic, of course, had a lot of time on his own as well, but was eventually able to find love, find a new family, and all these friends as well. And things have kind of gone well since then. And then with Shadow, the reverse happened. That because Maria was one of the only people who kind of, you know, cared about him in that way, everyone else just saw him as dangerous. When he gets out, everyone else sees him as dangerous once again. And again, it's just all anger, fear, and he wants his revenge for what happened, of course. And so just the different trajectories of the idea that they each could have gone down the other path under different circumstances, but this is how we get our good hedgehog, bad hedgehog dynamic, which is a very good setup. And so early on, you do have the whole idea of like, you look like me, no, you look like me. Of course, that's a very cool sequence. They get beaten up quite badly by Shadow because I guess his teleportation powers mostly are what really take them by surprise and give him the edge. The main setup with these, actually, when we get into it, is that in the sequence at Gun Headquarters, Maddie and Tom are involved as the human support because they need human characters to kind of stealthily interact amongst other human characters. They have the kind of holographic changers where they completely look like a different person. Tom kind of goes off on his own to kind of fix things, to get the card by basically changing into the face of the kind of general who died early on in the movie. He was also involved in the backstory. I forget his name. It's like Waller or Wallen. I probably have it wrong, but him. And obviously the idea here is that it's a high enough position for him to get the other character to give him the key card, but it's the wrong person because he's then confronted by Shadow. And this is a person, it's basically the person who Shadow blames, because in the sequence, this is the character who sort of caused the gun to go off that led to the explosion. Even though he was actually trying to stop anyone from shooting, there is the level of blame there of like, this is one of the main people Shadow views as being responsible. So he full power punches, you know, this character, but it's actually Tom. And Tom is like out and in like a critical condition at this point, right as Sonic kind of like catches up. So Sonic sees this happen, and that Shadow has like attacked the new most important person in Sonic's life, basically, his father figure here. And it's a very good moment. Like, this is actually really well done here, this sequence here, because it's Shadow thinking he's getting revenge against the person he blames. But then actually what he's really doing is that he's nearly killing, he's nearly doing what happened to him to someone else, in nearly killing, you know, kind of someone else's Maria, basically. And you can see that in his face, that like kind of, what have I done? but he's so consumed by revenge that he's just like, no, I do what I have to do, and he kind of runs off at this point. But this is, of course, what sets Sonic on his kind of path of revenge. That will he become a new Shadow? Is this going to be the path he goes on? We know it's not going to happen, but this sort of an arc is always, I think, a very simple but an effective one of, can the hero kind of stay true to their goals, their ideals? And I think it's super effective because you see Sonic at this point, you know, be a lot more of a serious character, wanting to get stuff done. The joking kind of comes down a little bit, and he immediately wants, like, the Master Emerald. That, like, I don't know where he is, but I want the Master Emerald to be more powerful than him, and I'll take him out if I have to, basically. And this is, of course, where the scene with Knuckles happens, which is when Sonic is angry. But by the end, of course, he realizes the importance of Knuckles to the team. But at the time, he's trying to become Supersonic for vengeance, which is interesting because they do address Supersonic prior to the raid on the gun headquarters, which is like, Maddie proposes, why don't you just use that to do it instantaneously, like go God mode, basically. But Sonic, before the vengeance kind of arc happens, is like, no, that's a tricky one, because basically it takes a lot of effort to give away that power afterwards and not just kind of stay super the entire time, because it sort of like inflames your emotions to a certain degree. But the super stuff is always cool. Yes, they have sort of simplified the dynamics by not having the emeralds, the Chaos Emeralds, really be separate things, but they are, because they want the cool effect of the 7 emeralds sparkling and kind of like merging together. But really, you have to find one thing to become super in this universe. I'm wondering in future content, might they do a thing where, like, if the Master Emerald like breaks, then the Chaos Emeralds are maybe separated and perhaps more powerful because the controller is not there anymore. That could be an interesting thing, to have more of a kind of MacGuffin chase plot and utilize the individual kind of power of each emerald, which could be an interesting kind of place to go down. But yeah, we get Sonic versus Shadow. Of course, because they're both hedgehogs, you know, eventually Shadow's actually able to utilize, I suppose, how angry Sonic is and sort of hard counter him initially with, like, you know, he basically kind of does like the pressure point kind of blow to send Sonic out of super form. Sonic, you know, they both go super again. And it's cool because with no giant enemy that requires them to both be super, it makes sense for them in this moment to fight each other as super form. And this is where we get our like giant big fight. It's very, very cool here. And because Sonic, of course, is sort of based on sort of certain Dragon Ball elements, of course, it's so similar that like the super forms are just kind of Super Saiyan forms, basically. It is that, like, if you want your sort of quote unquote live action Dragon Ball, it's right here, basically, to a certain degree, and it's really, really well done. And this, of course, leads up to the big kind of heart-to-heart moment between them, which is that Shadow goads Sonic to basically, yes, like, become more anger, you know, have more anger, more vengeance. Is that what you want to do as a hero? You've left your friends behind to accomplish your goals here, kind of in a way just like me. And even pointing out that, like, what was that guy that I injured, what's his name, Tom? And then you get the brutal supersonic uppercut that, like, pretty much is what kind of finishes the fight. Really, really cool stuff. But then we build, of course, to, with the fight over, the idea is kind of Shadow basically tells him, like, finish it. But of course, this is the moment where Sonic makes the kind of heroic decision. No, I'm not going to, you know, end it like this. I won't kill you about this, because it's not who he is. It's not who he wants to be. He does want to be the hero. And because he does know the core of Shadow's backstory, he kind of decides to use this as the moment to sort of try and get through to Shadow. And so the two of them do have this really nice moment sitting down, talking about the past. Like, I think Sonic mentions, like, Longclaw to him at this point, that he also has the same loss but took a different path. Shadow mentions, you know, stuff about himself and Maria. And as the the sun, the star, comes up to light them as they're sitting down on the moon. This is when the line about stars with Maria gets brought up again, and the whole idea of that, yes, the light can still be there even if the star is gone. Like Maria's ideals and what you learn from her, the way you feel thinking about those times with her can still be kind of present. You just have to kind of choose, and it's the idea of like, what would she want basically going forward. And this is where the two of them do decide to team up, and that, yes, Maria would not want the world to be ended because of something happened to her, especially Shadow to be someone responsible for that, so he has to save it as well. And this is when Live and Learn happens. They go super together to fight everything that's going on here. So that's really, really well done. I mostly, I think, have referenced what happens during the kind of fighting here. They mostly team up to fight the robots. Then there's the big moment where the Eclipse Cannon fires. They block it using their kind of super forms, their aura. And this is when Tails and Robotnik are trying to like avert the beam. Now, the bottom of the moon gets sliced off, which is a kind of fun kind of moment, but they do avoid the cannon hitting the Earth. Sonic runs out of energy at this point, and this sets up the whole him needing to be saved by his team. That even though he's gone off on his own, the team have kind of come after him, and this is the big kind of lesson at the end of everything for him. But then it leaves Shadow have to deal with the fact that the power source of I keep wanting to say the Space Colony Arc, but of the Eclipse Cannon, which basically is what they're going for, he has to save it. And so he kind of pushes his back. He takes off his inhibitor rings. Now, admittedly, I don't think they ever established the significance of that, of like if it really means anything, because in the end scene he kind of like picks them up, like putting them back on, I think. So I'm not sure necessarily what the full takeaway is, but still, he goes full power here to block this, but basically seems to blow up with everything that happens. Now, the idea probably is what actually happens here is that because it's his own power powering the station, probably some crazy teleportation chaos control happens and he's just teleported somewhere else, which could also be an out for Eggman surviving, but we have to wait and see what they're actually kind of planning to do there. But that is the sacrifice there. So there's that, and then yeah, we just need to talk about the end credit scene. So yeah, the one that's after the credits is Shadow revealed to be alive, which is cool just to establish that, hey, he's not just, I guess, one movie and done. We're going to get more with him. The question obviously is kind of when and where with that. Is movie 4 going to be Shadow focused again? I don't think so. Will it be enough for him to just be a returning character at some point in movie 4? I'm not sure. So it does feel like if they are going to do extra content between movies, Shadow probably is very deserving of some sort of content somewhere. Now, what exactly do they do? I would say the arc for Shadow at this point would be for him to find his family. And whatever way they go with that. They sort of gave you a little bit of he had an okay dynamic with Stone, but it was mostly played up for jokes that they were watching the kind of Spanish drama together or whatever. So there's maybe an opportunity with that, but that feels like it's maybe getting Shadow back into the fray immediately. So maybe this is where they do a thing where like we get the formation of Team Dark in like a Shadow TV show, and you get like him and Rouge and Omega, or whatever way they're going to exactly do that. That could be a way to address maybe him specifically wanting to seek out details of his origins as such, like who is he, why is he different than Sonic, and that whole idea, why was he in that meteorite, what's the whole deal there, and just have a much more impactful story kind of in a TV show in this universe, because unless we're going to have a second movie that also is Shadow focused, he needs development elsewhere, I think. But cool that there is more planned, I guess, for him. The mid-credit scene, which I do take to be more of the direct setup for movie 4, is they echo the idea of the Team Sonic having a race. Sonic overshoots the finish line by a large margin, and so ends up separated from everyone else, and is confronted by initially one Metal Sonic, but then an army of Metal Sonics. And it looks like he's not going to have a chance here because he's completely surrounded and doesn't necessarily know how strong they are, how to deal with them. And he is saved by the arrival of Amy, who comes in and obliterates them. So they seem to be going for the idea that Amy has sort of like the pink energy. So she has the sort of kind of like the Knuckles thing that I guess she can channel through her hammer to do kind of like big devastating attacks. And yeah, she saves the day. She doesn't say anything, so I don't think there's a voice actress involved yet, but she comes down, she's wearing a cloak, and we just end with her taking off the cloak, revealing that yeah, it's her. It's a pink hedgehog. She has a bit of a, you know, a kind of hairstyle going on, like her kind of game model. It looks really good. Like the second they moved past the initial Sonic movie design, they just seem to nail how to do them well in live action. But what does this mean for movie 4, I suppose, is the idea. Is what plot are they going to do? The whole Metal Sonic Amy connection obviously is like Sonic CD, I believe. But I don't think, a lot of those early games, there's not much of a plot as such. So the assumption here with multiple Metal Sonics is probably that there is an overall leader Metal Sonic, like maybe Neo Metal Sonic or something like that. They might be referencing Sonic Heroes, kind of. I think he was the main villain in that game, if I remember correctly. So there's that. The big thing, though, with Amy's introduction here is that if you just revealed sort of in the same way as maybe like Tails, Amy's now here, without all this other stuff, it'd just be like, okay, but like what plot does Amy bring with her? Like, very cool that you're adding to the plot, makes complete sense, but the metal thing, that she seems to be aware of this and has tracked these Metal Sonics here, is fascinating in that, where has she come from? And this is maybe where we're building up to the idea of, are we going to maybe be a little bit focused away from Earth in future movies? Might we set up the idea of, in this case, because Amy is also a hedgehog, what's the deal with like the quote-unquote Hedgehog clan? I forget if the first two movies really addressed that, because again, Sonic was raised by Longclaw, who's an owl, and they were attacked by the echidnas. So I don't think they've really addressed like the whole hedgehog significance here, and that could explain a few things, that if she's maybe from whatever planet or dimension the hedgehogs are from, that maybe the Metal Sonics have an origin that is separate from, like, Robotnik made them as like an echo of actual Sonic. What if they are just based on hedgehogs overall? There's a way to do it that's kind of interesting, in that like maybe Eggman has made Metal Sonics in the gap between movies, because again, he wasn't really doing anything at the start of this movie until kind of Gerald kind of came on the scene. Maybe he had built this in the background, and they've been activated with his demise. But then why does Amy know about it? How does she arrive at the exact right moment here? That's the kind of interesting one. So that's the only thing I can really think of right now, is just that she is from a planet where these Metal Sonics or Metal Hedgehogs are an army by some sort of a person, and that's what we're doing. Because at least in my head, I don't immediately think that Metal Sonic is like the most ideal overall plot, and that it feels like there needs to be a bit more going on here other than this. Other than that, I guess just a speculation of what sort of characterization Amy should have. So straight away, they're going for the idea that she is powerful. She can handle herself in a fight. That, okay, if she joins Team Sonic, we've got another character who has kind of, with her hammer, kind of like the kind of strength of Knuckles. But it's also our first sort of female character who's one of the kind of Sonic animal cast as well. So that's kind of interesting. Her characterization from the games, especially in more recent stuff, has been more that she is more of the kind of like organizer, who can be more of your kind of proper leader rather than like heroic leader like Sonic is. Like she will lead an organization, or you know, a military style thing, rather than Sonic, who's more leading with just his charisma because he is the hero. And then, of course, I think they're not going to avoid addressing the whole idea that this is one of your main sort of ships within the franchise, which has always been done, I think, typically with Amy really likes Sonic, but Sonic always kind of runs away from her to a certain degree. Now, how hard are they going to hit that? Are they going to try and revert this, or kind of anything like that? I think they'll probably do something. They probably don't want to overdo it, but I think people will be annoyed if they just completely ignore it or try and overly do the reverse, that she's just not at all interested in that, and she's just this fighter and stuff like that. I've seen a few ideas from some people that maybe Sonic is the one who really likes her and they reverse it in that way, but then maybe she actually does like him. Who knows? But there is potential with this character, I think, for sure. And if there is a full-on backstory with wherever she came from, that could be quite interesting. I'm interested to see how they do it, in that, like, has the conflict now come to Earth and it's just going to stay here? And it will just be backstory about Amy explaining what this is, but it's mostly on Earth. That seems to be the way they're going about these movies up to now, is that we have to basically pull certain characters from the Sonic planet through into Earth and then do the plot here. But I'm wondering, will we eventually do something where Sonic has to go to one of these planets and it's just a whole planet of all these characters and that whole thing. But either way, they're my thoughts on Sonic 3. A lot more to talk about with this one because there's just more of a plot. It feels like this is the one where they're all in, they are committed, they know that this works and people are invested in it. And so yeah, the Sonic cinematic universe is here. They just need to realize why stuff worked here, kind of what the Knuckles show did that wasn't great, which is, I think, unfortunately, it is why are you focusing on the human characters, especially the ones we don't really care about? We want the Sonic characters, and that's what they need to do. But yeah, this movie was really, really good. Outside of some, like I said, some weirdness just around, it has a movie length, kids movie length, so it's never going to have the full depth that maybe everyone wants, and some of the balance with the humor, especially surrounding Gerald and Ivo, like I discussed. Otherwise, everything else I think worked very, very well, and I'm eager to see the movie again at some point as well. So let me know what your thoughts were on Sonic 3, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.